Welcome, everyone, to the Friday, November 22nd, 2024, The Turkey is Basting episode of On Iowa Politics. This week, an Iowan is the new U.S. ambassador to NATO. Iowa Democrats talk about where the party goes from here. The latest on the recount in Iowa's first Congressional District election. And finally, you love us. You really love us. Or at least about a third of you do. Hello, everyone. I'm Erin.murphy, the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. And as we go around the horn and introduce everyone this week, I would like you all to tell us your favorite Thanksgiving dish. It can be an entree, a side, a dessert. Take your pick. As for me, I'm not going to say turkey, even though I love turkey. I love the fruit, quote unquote, salads that my mother makes. And I say quote unquote salads because if you're not familiar with them, I don't want anyone to operate under the notion that these are in any way a healthy food choice. I'm talking about the ones that are made with fruit, yes, but also like marshmallow and jello and all that stuff. Oh my God, so good. I've had ones with oranges, ones with like apple and Snicker bar pieces in them. I love those things. And mom seems to bring those out at Thanksgiving every year. All right. That's mine. With me this week, our Deputy Bureau Chief, Tom Barton. What do you love at Thanksgiving dinner, Tom?
Yeah, for me, it's going to be a tie between green bean casserole and sweet potatoes.
Oh, man. I like neither of those things, believe it or not. Yeah. How about that? Good choices, though. It's a safe space. Everybody's choice is a winner. Sarah Watson of the Quad City Times is with us. Sarah, what do you love eating on Thanksgiving?
Pretty much any form that potatoes take, I will eat that. Mashed, cheesy, shredded in a casserole, scalloped, roasted. Sign me up.
As long as it was a spud, you're good with it, huh?
Yeah.
All right. And finally, Gazette columnist Todd Dorman is with us. Todd, what's your favorite Thanksgiving food?
Um, I like the stuffing. I'm in charge of making Thanksgiving.
Oh, okay.
If something doesn't if there's a delay, it's because I've picked a too elaborate stuffing. Uh,
Okay.
and my oven doesn't have enough room.
Todd, I was just going to ask, how elaborate do you get with your stuffing? Is it just like the Stouffer's box stuff, or do you?
No, I some years I've had it with oysters, some years with
Wow.
um sausage. There's a goat cheese ham cherry one.
Wow.
So yeah,
Do you bring this to the office ever? And if you do, let me know which days. I'm curious to try some of
I
these.
should just buy stovetop and just enjoy myself, but I
I
can't.
was gonna when you said at the start, I was gonna ask when you're in charge, does that mean that you have a busy day of preparation, or do you keep high V on your speed dial?
No, I usually cook the turkey outside, which allows me to get away from my family. I got to go check the bird. Sorry. Uh,
And this will be the first and last time that I'm now hoping there are some people who don't listen to the podcast. I'm now hoping
so yeah.
keep you out of trouble. All right. We'll try to remember to ask Jared's his when he rejoins us. Let's start this week with the story Tom and I wrote, in which we talked to a bunch of different Iowa Democrats of all stripes, elected officials, consultants, grassroots leaders, to get their sense of where the party goes from here after yet another unsuccessful election cycle across the state. Now, this is very informal, but I was kind of thinking about this, and out of the last six elections every 2 years, really only one of them, the 2018 midterm, has been even mildly successful for Iowa Democrats. So um, they're on a streak. Tom, you and I talked to a bunch of people. We got a pretty wide range of perspectives. Were there any common threads that you heard in there, or maybe just something that jumped out into the people that you talked to?
Yeah, I think some of the common threads were that the Iowa Democratic Party needs to um, do better in talking to or promoting messaging its agenda on to working class families, to middle class Iowans. They need to do a better job of talking about how they're going to address economic issues, how they're going to address the kitchen table issues, the issues impacting the family's pocketbook. And we heard from different people involved in the party, including those who are doing more of the grassroots work. We heard from consultants, and we also heard from lawmakers themselves saying that Iowa Democrats have a messaging problem, that they need to do better talking about Iowans' pocketbooks, and while maybe not focusing less on more social issues like abortion and reproductive rights. Those issues, remain important, and Democrats will continue to message on that. But they also need to put more emphasis and importance on, again, how they're looking out for working class Iowans, and really kind of rebuilding those groups of voters that have left the party over the past election cycles. If you look at the election results, you look at places primarily along the Mississippi River, Iowa's mid-sized communities that traditionally were Democratic strongholds, or were communities where Democrats did well. You look at election losses that they suffered this year for state house seats in Marshalltown and what's the other one? Was it Mason City? They've also lost support in communities, again, that are traditionally working class, blue collar communities where Democrats, have held power for a long time up until recent election cycles. So if you look at places like Dubuque County, if you look to Scott County, you look down to places in Burlington, Clinton, those mid-sized communities, they've lost support there among the kind of working middle class Iowans who feel that Republicans are doing a better job, I guess, essentially looking out for their pocketbooks and looking out and, doing things to help them make ends meet, whether that's, cutting taxes, be it property taxes, income taxes. And I spoke to House Minority Leader Jennifer Converse, and I asked her about that, and she kind of pushed back on that criticism that the Democratic Party failed to offer a compelling working class agenda. She noted that Iowa House Democrats put forward proposals, cracking down on wage theft in the state, enshrining collective bargaining in Iowa's constitution, freezing the cost of college tuition, and boosting apprenticeship programs for young people. She reiterated their people over politics agenda, included proposals to lower costs for Iowans and Iowa families. Unfortunately, because they're in the minority, their proposals didn't go anywhere in the Iowa House during the legislative session. And, she acknowledged that there is a disconnect there, as we saw in the election results, that for whatever reason, their message either isn't getting out to Iowans, isn't reaching voters, or is not resonating with them. And, I heard the same criticisms from State Senator Zach Walz, a Democrat from Coralville, who was ousted as leader of the Senate Democrats. Was that just last year?
Yes. 2023, right? That happened.
Right. Yes, that's right. And it said that the party, needs to foster a new generation of leaders who can connect with middle class and working class Iowans and address their concerns rather than just relying on traditional party messaging and approaches. Also heard from people that Iowa Democrats need to focus on continuously engaging and listening to voters, noting that people are tired of politics and feel unheard, and that there needs to be a focus on grassroots door knocking and organizing to help Democrats cut through social media's polarizing effects. That the party in that needs to look at reaching out to disaffected voters and reaching out to no party voters, to those independent voters, and doing that on a more consistent basis rather than just every election cycle, and really focusing on those turnout efforts, and not just focusing, excuse me, on those turnout efforts, a few months before the election, but again, being a consistent presence, maintaining a consistent presence and dialogue with voters, again, rather than just kind of short-term transactional interactions.
Yeah, and Todd, I'm curious to get your take. Is all that stuff that Tom talked about and that we heard from the people that we talked to for this story. Did the Gazette solve Iowa Democrats' electoral issues, or is more? What do you think is the biggest shortcoming in the party right now, as it pertains to connecting with voters? Obviously,
Yeah, those are all, sound arguments and ideas. But, the biggest problem that Democrats may have is if this sort of rejection of their brand is kind of now an ingrained
mm.
social construct where people in rural areas, I mean, I've read things where basically to call someone in a small town, if you call someone a liberal, that's about a bad as bad a thing as you can call them. And so Democrats face that. I mean, they can go to communities and speak with voters, but I'm just afraid that, you know, that may not cut through that the social attachments that people have to the Republican Party. I mean, you look at the polling, people generally like a lot of the ideas that Democrats have. They don't like a lot of the things that Republicans passed, but they didn't, Democrats see policy as more important, and Republicans sort of see, and there's research on this, sort of see their team identity as being more important than individual policy issues. I mean, so they pass vouchers, you don't like it, but I'm not going to abandon my team. That sort of that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. If I could just jump in here real
Yeah.
quick, forgive me, Todd, because I want to add a little bit to that. A colleague shared this story, and I won't say the colleague because I hadn't talked about could I use your name on the podcast, but I'll just say I know the story itself is fine to share. They talked about talking to a voter in Iowa in a rural area. I can't remember if it was about the private school assistance or the AEAs. It was one of those two issues, and this person, a pretty reliable Republican voter, was telling my colleague in the State House press corps how terrible they thought that policy was and how they're worried it's going to have a real bad impact on their community. And my colleague said, so does that mean you're going to vote for the Democrat in the election? And the person said, oh, no, we don't vote for Democrats around here. And that kind of speaks to exactly what you're talking about there, Todd.
Yeah. I mean, and younger voters, some of them are very engaged. Others who have grown up amid the dysfunction have sort of maybe, I don't know, just kind of turned their back on the whole thing, which is bad news for Democrats. Seeing a video online where a young woman was asked about whether she would vote, and she basically said, "No, I just kind of let the universe handle that kind of stuff." The universe can be very cruel. It can be very cruel. I really think right now, the last stand, the thing they really need to be focusing on already is that 2026 gubernatorial race. I mean, that if they could somehow run a competitive race and win, that would, then all sorts of things would get better for the party. And I think I would like to see them have like a competitive primary instead of just anointing one candidate, although I fear that's what's probably going to happen. So that's the next big target on the horizon. I mean, they want to pick up some legislative seats and stuff, but I think the governor,
Yeah.
whether Reynolds runs or not, I think that's a place they might be able to make an argument.
Yeah, and we'll obviously be talking about that election a lot in the coming weeks, months, as we put 2024 behind us and start thinking about the 26th cycle. And you're absolutely right, Todd. I think it starts with whether Reynolds runs for reelection, and then it'll be interesting, and it'll be incumbent on the party to put forth a stable of candidates that the party and the donors can get behind. And I don't say this as a criticism of the candidates who did run in 2022. It's just the reality of what happened. And obviously the results spoke for themselves. You went from a governor who was elected by just under 3 points in 2018 to winning by, what was it, 17, 19 in 2022, and having done things that the party clearly could run on in the meantime. Anyway, so that's
Well, and there's going to be candidates probably from the left end of the spectrum who are going to be arguing, let's nominate a pure Democrat to give people a real choice. I'm not sure that's a great strategy. But Tom Vilsack's not coming back. That whole Democratic Leadership Conference.
Tom Vilsack's not walking through that door.
No, Democrats who sort of, acted a little bit like Republicans to get back into office. I think that ship has sailed also. So it's got to be a winning message, but not sure what it is.
No. By the way, that was a sports ball reference that I made for anybody who's in the crossover of the Venn diagram of Iowa politics and famous NBA coaches' press conferences. You can at me if you got the reference. We'll see who my new best friend is. Okay. Let's move on to what has become a recurring segment. What's the latest in Iowa's first congressional district? We'll see if we can get some music and a sponsor for this one while it's a live wire. Republican incumbent Congresswoman Marionette Miller Meeks appears. Bailey texted, they're on it. All right, we're already rolling. Marionette Miller Meeks appears to have won re-election in the first district. The unofficial results show her with an advantage of roughly 800 votes, but that is a very small margin out of the more than 414,000 casts. So Democratic challenger Christina Bohannon has requested a recount in all 20 of the district's counties. It's the second recount in this Eastern Iowa district since in the last 4 years. There's also one in 2020. Okay, so Sarah, there was some things that happened this week. What's the latest?
Yeah, so all the 20 counties are in different stages of the recount process this week. The first order of business is picking recount board members. So each of the 20 counties in the district needs a 3-member recount board. Each campaign picks a member, and then they agree on a third person, or the district chief judge appoints the third if the campaigns can't agree. And so by the time this podcast is released on Friday, most of the counties will have their 3-member board in place, and will decide how they want to count the ballots and when they want to do it. And some have already started. So, for example, Muscatine County was scheduled to start on Wednesday to start recounting those ballots. And Lee County, home to Keokuk, started today. Clinton County, I know, is starting on Saturday. Scott County, which has the most ballots to recount of all the 20 counties, has not yet set a date of when to start recounting ballots. So that Scott County and Johnson County will be the counties that take the longest, just because they have the most votes to count. And then the Secretary of State provided an opinion that under state law, recount boards should only count the ballots by hand or by machine, and not do a hybrid method of counting them via machine and then checking it by hand if there are some that the machine maybe separates out that were unreadable. And so recount boards generally have authority to make decisions on how to recount the ballots. So this is advice from the Secretary of State, but the recount boards have that final decision on how to how to recount the ballots. Yeah, so that's kind of the update for this week. A lot of the county auditors I talked to hope to wrap up this process by Thanksgiving. They need to have it done by December 2nd when the state board meets to certify the results. So that is a tight timeline. Scott County, which I mentioned, has the most ballots to be recounted. Carrie Tompkins, the auditor, she told the Board of Supervisors this week that she expected it would, if the board chooses to do a hand recount, it would take like 150 hours, is what her office has estimated. Machine count would be much less than that. She said less than half of that time, but that still is a considerable amount of time for them to be recounting ballots. So, so certainly that's the holiday week plans, I think, for a lot of county offices, auditors' offices for this this holiday week.
No place they'd rather be, I'm sure. Sarah, I don't know if anybody has mentioned this as you've been covering it, but one of the interesting things as you described this is I'm reminded that some of these, like you mentioned Secretary of State's guidance over how exactly the ballots should be recounted. That was one open question that kind of came up in the 2020 recount that Tom remembers all too well. And also the issue of some bigger counties felt they would be better served by having bigger, more members on their boards. And this was all suggested to state lawmakers to address in state elections laws. And while we passed any number of elections bills, they didn't do this one. And so we're back with the same kind of questions and inconsistencies. And this was the exact warning that we're going into an election now where this could happen again. And here we are.
Yeah, I didn't, the county auditors didn't talk much about the change in laws. There was one county auditor I talked to in Lee County who she had some very strong words about the recount process. She thought, or at least this recount, she thought that that they should change state law to make it even like closer, that you the threshold of like when you could request a recount. She felt like this go around was going to be a waste of time and resources to recount all the ballots. Obviously, they're doing it. It's within Christina Bohannon's authority under state law to request a recount. And yeah, 800 votes of 414,000 cast, qualifies for the state reimbursement of the bond that the candidate has to put up. So it is within her authority to count that, but that one county auditor was really not happy about.
We've said this in the recent couple of weeks on the show here that from our experiences having covered this, and Tom talked to a national Iowa / now kind of national expert, that 800 votes is very, very unlikely to happen.
Right.
But at the same time, as you noted, and we've talked about, it is a spectacularly small percentage of the overall margin. I mean, we're talking about literally 0.2%, not 2%, 0.2% was the margin in this election. I mean, if we're all being really honest with ourselves here, I think it's understandable that a campaign would ask for a recount with that slim a margin. Yes, the raw vote number is probably hard to move, but weird things have happened, and maybe there's one big batch somewhere that was completely wrong or something. I mean, I don't know, but that's sliver of a margin. It's not hard to imagine why any campaign would ask for a recount there.
Well, Sarah, in your last story, didn't you do some research looking at how often recount changes the outcome?
So yeah, a nonpartisan election research organization called Fair Vote, they looked at about 7,000 statewide, and I should say this was statewide general elections in the United States. Between 2000 and 2023, there were 36 recounts, and of those recounts, just 3 changed the result. And all 3 of those, those reversals, the margin was less than 0.06% of all votes cast for the top 2 candidates. The most recent of which was in a 2008 Senate race in Minnesota. So this is statewide recounts, but I think a large recount like that is that, I mean, that was the,
Yeah.
available.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, the likelihood of, I guess, of picking up more votes, I guess, for your side seems to be better in a statewide race, right? There's a larger universe of ballots
Right.
compared to a congressional district where you're talking about just a portion of the state.
Yeah. Not to mention, what was that margin again, Sarah? 6/100ths?
Yes, 0.06%.
Yeah, but by that standard, 0.2% is a giant number. That
Yeah.
your number is actually small. So
Yeah, several of the county auditors I talked to, they said they'd be surprised if they saw, even like 20 ballot and um that, I mean, you'd have to pick up about 20 ballots in each district or more. I'd have to do the math in my head real quick, and that's not my strong suit, but but you'd have to pick up a certain number of votes in every county to be able to overcome that 800 margin. And especially with the Secretary of State's guidance to do only hand count or machine recount, I think it's likely that most boards are probably going to go with the quicker option, given how many ballots there are. And in that case, you're basically just running the ballots through the same machines, and it's unlikely that you're going to find any additional
yeah.
votes.
Yeah, that's a good point. It would be 40. So 800 votes divided by 20 counties, right? So it would be, you'd have to net pick up 40 votes per county.
Yes.
And that's I mean, literally every county. It means you can't, you'd have to bat 1,000, which seems unlikely because it's not uncommon for a recount to swing things the other way and a person's advantage actually grows. So,
Right.
but we'll see. Just we're just all rooting that it doesn't last until March or April again. All right. While Marionette Miller Meeks waits to hear whether she still has a job in Congress, another Iowan learned this week that he has a job in President-elect Donald Trump's next administration. I am the king of segues. Matt Whitaker, the former U.S. Senate candidate in Iowa, who was Trump's acting U.S. Attorney General for a short time, was tapped by Trump to serve as the U.S. ambassador to NATO. Whitaker will serve in that position from Brussels, as I understand. Not a bad gig, I suppose. I don't know. I was about to say Brussels is lovely this time of year. I don't know if that's true. I'll assume it is. Todd, is Whitaker? Well, first of all, let me back up, Todd. So I'm going to throw a curveball at you here. As we sit here recording the podcast on Thursday afternoon, just a short time ago, it was announced that Matt Gaetz is withdrawing his name from consideration for Attorney General. Does Donald Trump rethink Matt Whitaker now?
Well, I don't think Matt Whitaker is in the same temperature of hot water that Matt Gaetz poured for himself into the jacuzzi or wherever he was during these misadventures. But I mean, Whitaker, he ran for U.S. Senate. Pretty much all I can remember about that race was that he said that there should be a religious test for judges, which I thought was a very seriously bad idea. Do I feel better at night knowing that Matt Whitaker is standing between us and the Russians? Maybe. I don't know. No, I don't. But but he doesn't seem to be terribly experienced for something like this. You'd think you would want to have some foreign policy experience, expertise in diplomacy and all of that. It seems like I'm not sure he's the right guy for the job, although he may just be there to try to act like a collection agency and try to get more money out of the other NATO countries.
Yeah.
So
sorry, I was just going to ask because it's not uncommon to see these ambassador positions filled by people who aren't necessarily qualified, but that's usually we're talking about like an ambassador to XYZ country. This is ambassador to NATO, I assume is the distinction here, Todd.
Yeah, this is our point person for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Sorry, that's pretty important right now because Russia has sort of become a threat again. Well, they've invaded Ukraine and may have designs on other countries. It'll be interesting during confirmation hearings if when Whitaker is asked whether he would adhere to the doctrine where if one NATO nation is attacked, they're all attacked,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone comes together to defend them. The future of the alliance, just a lot of things that I've never heard him express opinions about. I guess he'll have to get those opinions fairly soon. But yeah, I was a little surprised that was the post they gave him. I thought, something in the Justice Department would make more sense.
Well, and that's why I asked, like, now that Matt Gaetz is no longer on the table, do you think there's any chance that Donald Trump goes back and says, well, I need a new AG, maybe Matt Whitaker this time, or do you think he's looking elsewhere?
I don't know. I suppose
I
it's
know I'm
possible.
asking you to get inside the mind of Donald Trump here,
Well,
but
it's possible. I mean, he's looking for someone, an attorney general, who has sort of a strong partisan, stripes or
and would
record,
be
and will be willing
loyal.
to use the department to go after his enemies and such. I'm sure Matt Whitaker, if he received orders, he could probably do that too. But yeah, I think that Gates was, someone that would have no compunction about, dragging political adversaries into charging them and dragging them into court and God knows what else.
Yeah, I mean, the selling points for Matt Whitaker is he's held the position before. He served as
Right.
acting AG when now I'm blanking on the circumstances.
Bob
Pete's
Barr,
sake.
Bob Barr resigned. He
Bill
That's
left.
Barr.
right. Bill, yeah.
Bill Barr, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all right. We got there together.
Bob
But
Barker, I think,
yeah,
he had
but
something to do with it.
right, but in Matt Whitaker, you have a guy who has done the job. You know that he is going to be loyal, and that he's going to go ahead with Trump's plans and designs to restructure the Department of Justice to prevent what he sees as the weaponization of the DOJ. And so as somebody who, has worked in the DOJ, is familiar with it, you would think that he would be more well accepted, I guess, not only by lawmakers, who are familiar with him, and he seems to have a good rapport and support from, but also would be better recepted among the DOJ staff that work within the department.
I think it was in a New York Times article that Trump's advisors had been considering Andrew Bailey, the Attorney General of Missouri, and Robert Giuffre Jr., a top lawyer at Sullivan and Cromwell.
Okay.
Well, they've got a lot to choose from among the Republican attorneys general who have been very active carrying Donald Trump's cases into court. So
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
I could
maybe
have,
Brenna
I
Bird
did.
will be.
I was just gonna say. I mean, I
Maybe
didn't
Brenna
bring her
Bird will
up.
be our next attorney general. Who knows? Maybe in keeping with how many times I've mentioned him on this podcast, maybe Alan Ostergren will be next attorney general. It's just a shout out to him because I know he listens.
All right. Speaking of people who tune in, oh, I did it again. I'm so good. Finally, this week, the Midwest Newsroom, partnership of public radio stations in Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska, partnered with Emerson Polling to survey residents about where they find, quote, and this is right from the poll question, news about state and local politics that you trust. And I just found this interesting, so I thought it'd be a good closing topic today. In Iowa, 38% of those surveyed said they get state and local political news from local media outlets. That was the highest level, compared to 23% that they get it from national outlets and 22% that said they get it from social media. I was kind of surprised by that being higher. I know 38% isn't exactly an overwhelming number, or a number that you get and go around claiming you got a mandate, but I was actually pleasantly surprised by it. I'm curious what you all think of that. Like, were my expectations too low? Am I too beaten down by this industry? And should I have been expecting like 60 or 70% still? Or like, I thought, 38%, that's not too bad.
Well, the flip side of that is that,
62% get it elsewhere.
well, yeah, basically. And that's, but
Not good.
38's not bad. The fractured media landscape, it's hard to keep much of a audience segment these days. So, yeah, I get all my news off Blue Sky. So, no, I don't. I'm still trying to figure out Blue Sky.
I hear screaming from the ether from half of our listeners saying, "I knew it, I knew it."
I do wonder, so this is the first time I'm hearing about this, so I haven't read a lot about it, but it asks about, quote, news about state and local politics that you trust.
Mhm.
And, so they're asking about state and local politics. So if I was answering that question, I'd be like, well, yeah, I'm not going to find state and local politics
Right,
really on national
right,
outlets.
right.
So I wonder if, maybe are people always looking for state and local political news, or are they just looking for, national news? Does that make sense?
No, I know what you're saying. It is kind of a little bit of leading phrasing there. So thank you for raining on what little joy I plucked out of 38% to begin with, Sarah.
Sorry.
It's only 38%, and that's probably inflated because of the question. Great. Thanks a lot, Sarah. I'm fine. I'm doing fine.
Could be that so many issues at the state level have become are the same
Well,
as same as national issues. So
what's the difference anymore, right?
yeah.
For those of us who cover campaigns, who can tell an Iowa State House campaign from a campaign for Congress or president anymore? Oh, goodness. Well, on that chipper note, I'm going to go back to thinking about fruit salads with marshmallows and Snicker bars instead. All right. Speaking of which, we will not be on the air, quote unquote, next week. We're going to give the gang the week off for Thanksgiving. So we'll see you in December. In the meantime, that's it for this episode of On Iowa Politics. If you're not already, please subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice or on YouTube, where you should also smash that like button. You can also find the podcast each and every week on your preferred Gazette or lead newspaper website. Now that you've listened to the On Iowa Politics podcast, make sure you're also subscribed to the On Iowa Politics newsletter, where every morning in your inbox you'll receive all the latest politics and government coverage from our team. You can subscribe to that free newsletter at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. And lastly, don't forget that the work of everyone who you heard here today can be found on the pages and the websites of the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Mason City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. For Tom Barton, Sarah Watson, Todd Dorman, and our producer Bailey.cichon, I'm Erin Murphy. Be well, everyone. Be good, and have a safe and happy Thanksgiving.